Hello, my Z followers. Welcome back to the question where you have the question and I have the answer. And today we have a guest, my stepdad, Sean.
Hi.
And today's question, which is actually asked by him, was Is this generation living in a more difficult time than the last one? And I thought it'd be nice to do it with him because we have two different generation perspectives. He is from the boomer generation, and I am the Gen Z generation, which of course you know how that goes. So, what is your opinion on the matter?
I think your generation has a significantly much more difficult time than mine.
Why is that?
Well, you think about it. When I was 16, what did I have to worry about? I didn't have to worry about social media bullying. I didn't have to worry about the drugs that are out there now. The opioid problem wasn't there. My biggest worry at 16 was whether or not I was going to break my ass off taking my skateboard down the street or whatever. Um, the closer the global villages become, the more dangerous this world's become. And the stresses you guys have to deal with, the pressures you guys have to deal with. Like when I was 16, I wasn't told, what do I have to do in school? What am I going to do? What am I going to do? What am I going to do? We had the opportunity to figure that out for ourselves. Where you guys have got the pressures from everywhere, from your families, from your schools, from culture itself, thinking that everything has to happen now. Then you add the violence, the anger. I think this world is a lot angrier than it was when I was younger.
Yeah. And in a lot of ways, we are more progressive, we're more accepting, but with that acceptance comes people who are going to fight that.
Yeah.
And so we're in the most progressive age, but also in the most sort of controversial and divided age.
Yeah, the world is definitely more divided now than it ever has been.
Yeah. And that's not our fault. You can't blame like millennials or Gen Z on this. Everyone likes to. My dad is always saying, "Oh, it's you millennials," and I'm like, "One, I'm not a millennial. Two, we're just ruining the industries, and that's not our fault. That's capitalism."
When you think about it, back in the 60s when I was born, they blamed it on the flower children. They blamed it on the hippies, even though that generation was just trying to push back on the old school.
Which is what we're
So,
doing now.
which is exactly what you guys are doing now. And hopefully, you guys will actually make a breakthrough.
We're trying. We're trying very hard.
You're doing a good job.
Thank
One
you.
YouTube broadcast at a time.
Yeah. Or whatever I'm trying to do at Beamer.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And unfortunately, younger voices don't necessarily get heard as well as they should be. Because the older people think that they know better.
Or they do get heard and then we get criticized because we're younger. We apparently don't know what we're doing. That's another big change between generation is that this generation, my generation, is way more aware politically, economically, uh, internationally, nationally. We're more aware of everything that goes on.
And that's basically because of the social networks being available.
And
With,
because we have to.
yeah,
So much pressure has been put on us to like save the planet, save the economy, fix everything that we have to be aware of these things.
it's true.
It's like critical to our survival to know what to do to fix everything.
My generation didn't care about global warming. Our idea of global warming is what parka we're going to put on in the wintertime. Plastics? I was a generation of plastics. Um, Recycling? We never did recycling. Those self awareness for the environment. You guys live that every day. Pressure on that to have that being heard and trying to be in it to change those things. It's hard because you've got my generation who says, "Oh, we've always done it this way. Why would we change?" And you're like, "Because you have to."
And the difference in schooling too, where it's
Mm-hmm.
like we all know what needs to be done, but no one's going to teach us how to do it because if they taught us how to, then stuff would actually be done and people who were teaching us would be out of power.
Yeah,
More books are getting banned, more ideas, there's a stricter curriculum.
I don't understand the school curriculum now. I have to admit.
Well, how I understand, at least how I understand it for like reading and history and textbooks and whatever, it's catered to whoever pays the most. And right now, the people who pay the most is Texas. So if Texas wants to whitewash everything, every state's going to whitewash everything because that's what it does. Except for the East Coast because they don't use textbooks, they use the internet.
Well, I think you do that, but I also think that was still happening in our generation too. It's just the different views of it, right?
Yeah.
It was more of a Western culture versus the rest of the cultures. Whereas now you've got more of an international culture involved, so you can't do that anymore because other people will say, "Well, whoa, 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 what about us?" Like that's what happens um, with the new LBGT,
Mm-hmm.
right? Back in my time, nobody ever talked about that stuff. You guys are so more aware of that and more progressive about that. But the pushback from my generation is like, well, we never talked about that kind of stuff. What do we do? But you guys are going because it should be talked about.
I think another thing I heard about that, something I remember I read it somewhere, was why we're so loud about LGBT. It's just like, well, you killed off all the nice ones. You killed all the nice people. Now you just have the angry ones left.
Yeah. And there's a point where you've got so many generations of anger. There's a keg point. There's a point where the keg is going to blow up. It's like the same thing with cultural ethnics. You know, we've got white versus black versus yellow versus whatever now, and there's a point where we were supposed to be farther than we are, but it's worse now because there's a lot more anger involved, and because you have things like YouTube or social medias or people with their cameras and their phones, and everybody has a camera and phone, they will see the things that aren't right and they broadcast it to the world, and it builds that anger. Where in my generation, nobody had a phone, nobody had a, you had a camera, but you know, it took you a week or two to get the film processed, and then even then, who are you going to give it out to? You're not developing it to the world. But now everything is instantaneous, so the anger builds from that as well, I think, and that makes
And
it much more difficult.
and then you get into the whole thing about censorship, what the government's
Mm.
going to censor. Because I can say stuff like this, and I have the right to say it, but if they don't want me to say it, they can delete my videos. And so on, and that's up to them. And that's what the whole thing about my last censorship video is. It's about what they want people to see, what they feel people should be seeing. And that goes completely against the First Amendment. But we've always not really gone against the amendments. We created all of these amendments and then we ignored all of them. Except for the seventh. The Seventh Amendment, I googled it, is actually the only amendment never to be broken. Probably because it's the easiest to understand.
It's also the least uh, the least one to be broken because of the golden rule.
You don't know what the Seventh Amendment is, do you?
Which one is it?
It's basically if there's a court case involving like a fine up like above $7, then you are allowed to have a jury. That's the only one that's never been broken.
Cereal.
That's the only one that's never been broken. I shit you not.
Well, that makes sense though, because it goes back to the golden rule again. He who has the gold makes the rules. Right? You can't really well, it could work that way still too, technically, depending on how many lawyers you have and how much money you have, right? But you still have the right to be represented.
Yeah, basically it's the right to have a jury.
Yeah.
And it's the one thing that no one will ever break because it's the easiest to understand. But everyone's broken the Sixth Amendment. Everyone's broken like the Fifth Amendment. Everyone's broken the Fourth. There's loopholes around everything now.
Hmm. Well, in Canada, we get the Charter of Rights, which is similar to what you have, except it just basically has a one of everything kind of thing, where everybody has the right to speak their minds, whether of race, creed, gender based, everything like that. So I don't think every nation has that way, but they will be broken because it depends on who runs the show.
It's like, what was it, Victoria Woodhull? She was the first woman to run for president in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
She, before women had the right to vote, because she was based in like the early 1800s, like way before like suffrage really took off, she was doing her thing. And she and her sister went and talked in front of the Congress, and she said, well, in the 14th and 15th Amendment, you give every citizen a right to vote, every human the right to vote, therefore we can vote too. And I was like, the thing there is, they don't consider women people. That's why they didn't have the right to vote. Because even though it said all people have the right to vote, if they're not considered a person, that's the thing.
Well, that's the old generations of the white male-driven Western culture. Now, they've got a lot more fingers in that pie now. Who are trying to get their voice be heard. So yeah, maybe there's some parts that are easier now for people now, but I think the pressures are much bigger.
Yeah.
Because of the more voices to be heard, and the more voices that demand to be heard, and more voices that can be heard.
And it's the who do we allow to speak and who do we listen to?
It's a lot of voices.
It's a lot of voices and a lot of indecision.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of having to be independent in a world that kind of just forces you to not be independent.
You know, there's one person sitting there looking around and saying this voice, this voice, this voice, going, I don't know what to do. You get confused.
It's called Who Do I Listen To and What's My Voice Gonna Say?
That's why the most important part is to listen to your own. That's the most important part.
But then we're never taught to listen to our own.
No, I think that should be the first class they teach in school.
Yeah, it should.
I think a lot of things would be easier that way.
Yeah. We can't even get our shit together in school.
No, but that's going to be the way in the next generation too. In the next generation, until somebody stops and says, "How do we fix what's broken?" And we didn't do it. You guys are still suffering from it. What happens? Does the next generation have it even worse than us? Or you?
That's what I was talking with my dad about. So there's going to be a whole, war fought in the next, 50 years with, the next generation. A civil war between, the conservatives and the liberals. Because the next generation, the interesting thing about the next generation is that they will be the children of the millennials and of the boomers.
Oof.
You guys have millennial children, Gen Z children, and the alpha.
Yeah.
And millennials will have the alpha, so it's a 50-50 split on liberal and conservative.
Much more bipolar that way, I think.
Because that 150 is going to hate you guys.
Probably.
And the other 50 is going to hate the other half. I think it'll be a civil war, not between Democrats and Republicans, but between this two spectrum that they fall on. Because you can have your Democrats and Republicans, but at the end of the day, they're still split on that liberal or conservative scale.
And that would work on a global scale, too.
I mean, that's how, my dad's always like, it's between the Republicans and the Democrats, between this party and this party. But then you get to my generation, and we all talk in liberal or conservative terms. We don't care who's what. It's just are you more liberal, are you more conservative? And in this day and age, no matter what you say, you're going to get shot.
That's true. But it's not just about that. It's left versus right. It's always been that way.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a little bit stronger. The separation between the two is more now than it ever was. Because
now we've been through World War II. We've been through everything. There's a more defined definition of what one is and what the other isn't.
Well, it's not about World War I or World War II. It's about everything else that's involved afterwards. It's about the terrorism. It's about going to the Middle East. It's about the attacks here in our own culture. It's the influence of other countries to do what your want and needs are. And then the reaction of people that understand that that's not right. That it's not up to the Western cultures to determine the rest of the world.
It's up to education. And I think education would start with history. What is it I always say? That the Middle East would not be in as much turmoil now if they just kind of collectively got together and realized that, hey, maybe it's the Westerners that screwed them over to begin with.
And they have tried that. That's what the whole Arabian Spring was supposed to start, and unfortunately it didn't work because there's too many people in the Middle East that, you're right, as they learned how to unite together, oh my Lord, they would control so much more of their future than right now, where because you've got the Russians, you've got the Western cultures all trying to get into there and influence it.
Even just small little conflicts that they have, like Israeli and Palestine, if they just united and said, hey, the only reason this whole dispute happened is because England gave away land that wasn't theirs, and they fought the English, and they have nuclear weapons, that could be a whole other thing. Or if Iran just sat and said, hey, the only reason that we're under this Islamic regime is because Dwight Eisenhower ordered the overthrow of our democratic republic.
Mm-hmm. It's a lot of old mistakes that have to be repaired. It's going to take something significant to happen.
Yeah.
Which is scary because it could be violent. And again, your generation's going to have to survive that and deal with it. Or, just going to sit there with popcorn and watch. You guys are going to be the actual participants in that political situation. Good luck. Have fun with that.
We're trying. Right now, I think we're trying to just get through Trump's administration, whatever's happening in Hong Kong, and of course,
Well, now in Iran now.
Iran, Ukraine,
Ukraine.
the whole new government.
Nationalism across the globe.
On the rise again.
Yeah.
We're finding pride in ourselves that's leading us to be more divided than ever.
So we ask again, which generation had it worse? Well, definitely I think it's this generation. Because you guys are inheriting this world, and I don't know what you're going to inherit, unfortunately. On behalf of my generation, well, I'm truly sorry about that.
What I think is funny is that they were, because you know, Generation Alpha, that's already like the 5-year-olds and younger. You know, that's anyone born in like 2015 and on. And scientists and whatever, researchers are already calling them the smartest generation. And everything. They're already putting all their hopes in that generation. And now my generation is like...
5-year-old?
And my generation's like, you guys gave up on us already. You gave up on the millennials and you gave up on us.
Well, I know we gave up on the millennials.
Yeah, and now they're ruining you guys too. Yeah. All the industries that they're destroying because they can't possibly. Y'all have raised the rent. Y'all have raised the inflation rates. We can't buy anything anymore.
Nope.
It's just like what Mark said. The people making the products can never afford to buy them now.
It's true.
So it's not going to matter what.
Half the people in this world right now trying to make a living work 2-3 jobs just so they can pay the rent or their mortgage and never mind anything else. So
people aren't buying houses anymore. People aren't getting married anymore. No one's getting divorced. No one's having kids.
It's too expensive. No
one's buying diamonds. No one's going out to eat. No one buys bread or fabric softener. Because we've all realized that those are luxuries that we don't need to have. And y'all have ingrained that you need to grow up, go to college, get a job, get married, have kids, repopulate, but it's not economically feasible anymore. Not for the millennials. And if the millennials can't do it, God knows that us or Alpha can't do it.
Something has to break. Again, you guys have to deal with that.
Yeah.
Me, I'm going to be retired. I'll just, live off a craft dinner and...
I'll take away you guys' retirement. That will be our revenge.
Please don't.
I mean, whatever happens in America, you're kind of safe from that.
Well, no, Canada's got their own issues too, right? It's not just American. This is Western culture. And maybe that's the thing. Maybe it's Western culture collapsing on itself. It's been the power of the world for how many years, how many decades? Eventually, somebody else has got to rise up. And maybe we're just so... What is that one song by Roger Waters? How the aliens looked down upon the world and said, how did they die? They amused themselves to death. And maybe that's where we're at that point right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we are.
So that's what I say. It's going to take one sharp blow, and then things will change. I'm afraid of what that's going to be.
Me too.
And I've never been afraid like that when I was 16. The fact that you guys have to be that afraid for that.
My entire generation lives our lives in fear, either from the economy, from terrorists, from just going to school every day knowing that we could be shot.
Whereas I was worried about how much I was not going to piss off my dad, so I didn't get the belt. A little bit difference.
Well, thank you for doing this video with me.
Oh, yeah, it's my absolute pleasure.
So, this has been a video. My awkward ending. So long, and thanks for all the fish. Be excellent to each other. Party on, dudes.
You never walk alone.